on Monday, 4th of September 2023. I'm Beck Thomas, Mayor of Glenorchy and Chairperson of this afternoon's Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting. And I start by acknowledging that we meet today on the land of the Muanina people and acknowledge and pay respect to Tasmania's Aboriginal people as the original owners and continuing custodians of this land on which we meet, and pay respect to elders past and present. Joining me in council chambers this afternoon is Alderman Stephen King, Alderman Russell Yaxley and Alderman Josh Cockshut. We also have planning officers joining us together with our manager and our director of infrastructure works, and welcome to members of the public joining us in the public gallery this afternoon as well. The Glenorchy Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993. The Planning Authority has full power to make planning decisions on behalf of the council. Our meeting procedures today are fairly simple. Our planning officer will present an assessment of the application and their recommendation, and then answer any questions of elected members. Please note at this stage a decision has not been made on the application. I will then invite the applicant and any other interested parties to have their say by addressing the meeting. Speakers will be limited to 5 minutes. I may ask the planning officer to comment on any matters raised by either the applicant or other representatives who wish to speak today. The Planning Authority will then discuss the application. For statutory planning applications, the Planning Authority will decide the application and our senior statutory planner will explain appeal rights. For planning scheme amendments, our strategic planner will explain the decision being made by the authority and then the steps through the Tasmanian Planning Commission. When deciding an application, the Planning Authority is required by law to seek to further the sustainable development objectives of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act, to consider representations received during the public notification period, and to make the decision by reference to the current planning scheme provisions. Our meeting rules are just that we ask people comply with any directions given by myself as chairperson, and that we all please respect other people's views and everyone's right to have a say. That covers off on the Planning Authority declaration, which is item 1 of our agenda this afternoon. Item 2 is apologies. We have apologies from Alderman Jan Dunsby this afternoon. Item 3 is pecuniary interest. Do any Planning Authority members or staff have any pecuniary interest to note today? None. Item 4 is confirmation of minutes. Do I have someone to move that the minutes of the Glenorchy Planning Authority held on 7th of August be confirmed? Moved as a motion, Alderman King, seconded Alderman Yaxley. Any discussion, Alderman King?
No, Marilyn, thank you.
Elected members, any discussion? No. Happy for me to put the motion?
Thank you.
I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Agenda item 5, proposed use and development, partial demolition and construction of new education building, landscaping and car parking works at 286 to 294 Main Road, Glenorchy. And Sylvia, I believe, will be presenting on to us today. Sylvia's online.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So the proposal is essentially for the Cosgrove High School revitalisation project. Can we have the next slide? So this shows the general area of the school site on the left. So it's just south of Glenorchy CBD. You notice it's surrounded by residential development on 3 sides, and there's commercial development along the frontage along Main Road. The picture on the right shows the site in more detail. So there's various school buildings that occupy the site. And there's 6 car parking areas and a loop road. The school has got 2 accesses from Main Road that sort of form into a loop road. There is a bus shelter at the frontage and the bus stop. And the area to be redeveloped is highlighted in a circle, and there also will be a new bus shelter as well, which will be situated at the frontage. Can we have the next slide, please? So this slide here shows the zoning. So the school site is within the community purpose zone, and on 3 sides it's surrounded by residential zoning. The darker zoning is the inner residential zone, and the red zone is the general residential zone, and the purple zone is the commercial zone. The use is classed community purpose. The use is a permitted use within the zone, and the application is discretionary for some other items. Will you please have the next slide? So this shows the school site as we see it from Main Road. The first picture is a bit further away that shows the exit onto to Main Road. On the right-hand side, you see the front building a bit closer up. So the proposed development will go on the left-hand side where there's a flat roof at the existing building. Next slide, please. So this shows the building that will be replaced. So this building will be demolished. That's K block and part of H block. And next slide, please. There are also on the left-hand side 2 buildings. They are in association with J block that will be demolished, and also the picture on the right-hand side shows the existing bus stop, which will be demolished and replaced with a new one. Next slide, please. So this shows the site plans. So the lines in the red show the proposed demolition. So like I said, the demolition is for K block and part of H block and the buildings associated with J block. There will also be a new car parking area, which you can't see on that plan, but it's where you can see on the bottom of the page, there are 3 circles that show existing trees. So the car parking area will be in that area. Next slide, please. And this shows where the new development will be going. It's essentially one building with different kind of rooftops on it, and you will notice a semicircle area that's an outdoor amphitheater learning area that's also part of this application. Next slide, please. And here you can see the building in more details. So on the top of the page, you can see how the new building will fit in with the existing building when they are viewed from Main Road. So you will see on the left-hand side, that's what you can see when you're looking from Main Road. The proposed building has got a height discretion, so you will note how the rooftop will fit in with the existing buildings. You can see that it's only marginally taller than the existing buildings when viewed from the front. Also, there is a side elevation of the building, and I put some arrows where there is a height discretion. So the height discretion only comes about because the natural ground level is uneven and it's kind of stepping up in that area. So you note that the building will continue with the roof line all the way through, but it is higher where the arrow is because the ground is uneven where that is. So it will be an additional meter higher than what the acceptable solution normally allows. Next slide, please. This shows the car parking area that will replace an existing car parking area that's adjacent to the K block at the moment. And you will see it sort of comes off where the loop road is, where you come into the school, and that it's on the eastern side of the sports field, the new car parking area. Next slide, please. So the application invokes 4 discretions. One of it is the building height, which I mentioned before. So normally the acceptable solution has a maximum height of 10 meters. The proposal will have a height of 11 meters. in terms of the performance criteria. It needs to fit in with the character of the streetscape and also the character of the existing and adjoining properties. And we have to have regards to the bulk of it and to the topography of the land and so on. Having regard especially how it fits in with the streetscape and the existing building, it's only marginally higher than the buildings that are in front of it when viewed from the street. And also the roof line is not changing, so it won't really stand out in terms of height. So it was considered that it would satisfy the performance criteria in terms of the height discretion. There's no amenity impact on adjoining residences because they're quite a long way away, because the building site is to the north of one of the sports fields, so they're not adjacent to any residential development, so there's no overshadowings or anything like that. So it was considered that the building height discretion was acceptable. In terms of pedestrian access, the loading bay and traffic generation, that was all looked at by the development engineer. The applicant had to put in a traffic impact assessment, which was found acceptable by the development engineer. It's my understanding that there is pedestrian access on either side of the parking area, but there's no pedestrian access over the loading bay area. In terms of the loading bay, I think it doesn't quite comply with the size, but the development engineer can explain a bit more. But I think it was considered because of the type of deliveries that they have, that the loading bay of this size was sufficient to cope with that. And in terms of traffic generation, it's mainly what the capacities of Main Road, and Main Road can easily has easily got enough capacity to accommodate additional traffic. There will be additional traffic because the school population and the teaching population will be increased as part of this proposal, but the development engineer could answer any more questions in regards to that. So overall, all the discretions were found to be acceptable. There was no, the application was advertised in accordance with statutory requirements. There wasn't any representation, and so the approval, the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Do planning authority members have any questions of Sylvia at this point in time? McKing.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Sylvia, just you mentioned that the population would increase, but is the parking decreasing? Have I read that right?
Yes, it is, but however, there's still 14 additional car park. They require to have 50 car parking spaces under the planning scheme, and they're providing 64. So they previously had a large surplus, and now they're just reducing their surplus, but they're still complying with the minimum requirements. They still will have an excess of 14 car parking spaces.
So they have less, but saying it's additional, they have less than what they have now, but there'll be enough to cover excess based on the numbers that you suggested may turn up there. I mean, and I'm still not quite sure. I know this has nothing to do with planning, where 500 students are going to come from, but I guess build it and they'll come. That's the hope that I've heard somewhere in my past life, but see what happens. Sorry, I've digressed.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions?
Yeah.
Alderman Yaxi?
Could you just explain just regarding the pedestrian access and the loading bay side of things, just regarding the performance criteria? Some of that wasn't addressed necessarily in the actual report, so I just want to make sure that those areas are obviously been addressed in the traffic impact assessment and so forth.
Yeah,
I can the development engineer please address that?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Brad.
In terms of the pedestrian access, as Sylvia mentioned, that the footpath is provided along the parking area, is just not and with bollards and ramp and for accessible from the accessible parking space as well. So it's sort of provided adequately for the users. However, it's just not like obviously from that parking area to the entrance of the building, which is like a share area with loading bays and landscaping area. And that is the reason why it cannot fully comply with the acceptable solution. The TIA addressed that very well, that the nature of the user's type, and with the low speed environment of 15 km/h, it's considered the footpath is sufficient and safe. And in terms of the loading bays, there are several loading area and also providing the use and different type of goods, if you like. There's small rigid vehicle, small vans, medium rigid vehicle. So those would be sort of go into the different area, depends on the use. Is not usually for the big vehicles, you need a proper area that they can turn into, like have the on-site turning into one movement. And usually that's very challenging, if you like, to provide that for many type of commercial use or school like this one. However, the TIA addresses this one and satisfy that for medium and small rigid vehicle, there are areas that's suitable. These will be made and designed to that it's safe and they satisfy for the user with the light marking, the landscaping that gives a feel of this is like the school area. And also there might be some sort of small loading goods during the day and the business hour, but it will be done in a safe sort of manner. I hope that's answer your question. Is that sufficient?
Thank you. It's just making sure that there's where obviously it mentions obviously that the load map isn't to sort of that Australian standard sort of thing. So just flag for me that but if you're comfortable with that, the TIA's addressed those sufficiently, and we're comfortable. That's fine.
Yeah, I guess it's just that if you can imagine, I guess maybe you can do more than 3-point turns, and then you can still safely turn in the low speed environment, so that you can exit the area in the forward direction as well, instead of going one sweep movement. And that complies with the Australian standard that you can go with the, more than 8 meters radius sort of turning.
Yeah. So I guess with the type of vehicle that's going to be coming in terms of loading and unloading, that we're comfortable with that size.
Yeah.
Thank you. And just regarding the traffic generation, obviously there's going to be more than double. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Autumn King. Is that I mean, in terms of the coming and going, because obviously down the road a little bit further, we've also got the police station with increased amounts coming out of there. So my thought was we had that discussion previously. So just how that, it just seems to be a lot of cars coming in and a bit more of an increase into the future. So I just wanted to double check that was all, everyone was comfortable with that side of things in terms of being safe and efficient, I guess.
Do I answer that one? Or?
Yes. Any comments on that, Bree?
Yeah. So again, this is the main road, which is major road. The increase expected to be over 10%. However, as a TIA sort of said that it's main road and it's expect to be able to absorb that increase without any adverse impact, if you like, because the TIA also studied looked back for the crash histories and everything as well. All in all, this increase, yeah, it's just it. Yeah, it be able to absorb this, given it's a main road.
And I'll just, before I come to you, the numbers I read here, so it says there'll be an increase in the student cohort from 348 now to 500 students.
Mhm.
And a corresponding,
Not an extra 500.
yeah, to 500,
500.
yeah, not an extra 500, and a corresponding staff increase to 50. So you're looking at another 202 people on the site, which once upon a time, there was that many
Heaps more.
or more at Cosgrove. I think they had 1,000 people, kids at school at one point. So that perhaps helps as well.
Yeah.
No. Alderman King?
And if, yeah, sorry.
I'm just going to ask, I can't remember, is it left-hand only turn when you come out of there, or could it be left-hand only turn so we don't have people turning across the traffic? If there's going to be an increase.
We just have to leave
Um,
it open because it's a public meeting, because it's an open meeting. You can open it all the way up if that works. Yeah. It'll stay there. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, it was just a question whether when you come out of there, it's very difficult if you try to turn right and turn across the traffic. Sometimes you get away with it, but there ought to be times where it was only a left-hand turn, and that would overcome a lot of the stress on the traffic.
Bree, is that currently the case?
maybe if we can go to the plans. I'm not sure if I follow your which access that you.
From the main road access,
Yeah,
you mean, as you turn out?
As you
the
turn
main
out.
road access,
Yeah.
because it's only, you can't, it's only is out. There's one way in and one way out.
That's right.
Yeah.
But if
Yep,
you have
yep.
to turn left onto the main road and go down to the.
Yeah, that's it.
I can't
Yes,
remember-
that's right. Yep.
Yeah, I can't remember whether you can turn right on that exit or whether you can.
I think currently you can, but yeah. But they're going one way motion now.
They're going one way out, like I said.
Yeah, come out one way, but if you only could turn left
Yeah.
onto the
I
main
don't think
road.
that's an issue for the planning.
No, I suppose
So
not.
it'd be another traffic.
Yeah. Okay,
Something we could look at, but not something that
Yeah.
would be conditional on this.
got excited,
Application,
sorry.
yes. All right, any further questions or discussion? No? Well, we have a recommendation, or we don't have the applicant here and there are no representation, so we'll move on to the recommendation before us, which is for approval. That a permit be granted, subject to 7 conditions. Do I have someone to move that? Moved Alderman King, seconded Alderman Cockshut. Any discussion, Alderman King?
It's probably high time that there are upgrades to the school. You look that old when I was young, so if that's possible. And yeah, I think it's a good thing. I hope they get the student level up again, because I know that principals, the last few principals have worked really hard on the school, and that's nothing to do with planning, but the fact is they've worked really hard to try and improve the school, the reputation, the feel, the vibe. So I think new buildings will help in that as well. I think it's wasted money, so.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Alderman Cockshut?
Just echo Alderman King's thoughts just then, and also say it's a detailed report and all our questions and queries in regards to the car park and the traffic have been answered. So I think there's no reason to stop this from going forward.
Thank you, Alderman Cockshut. I too agree. There's 4 discretions that we had to consider as a planning authority, and I'm satisfied that all of those performance criteria have been met. So I'm happy to support the motion before us. Go back to the mover, Alderman King, to close back.
No, thank you, I'm fine.
For the vote, I'll put the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. Carried unanimously. Trevor, would you like to explain the process from here?
This process from here is that the planning authority has decided to approve the application. The applicant will be notified of the decision and then has 14 days to appeal the decision if they're not happy with the conditions. As there were no representatives, there's no need to notify any representatives of the decision. If the applicant decides to exercise their right of appeal, the permit would not be valid until the appeal is withdrawn or the appeal has been determined by the tribunal.
Thank you. Moving on to item 6, proposed use and development, multiple dwellings, residential, 28 Main Road, Montrose, and Peter is presenting to us. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you. Go to the next one, please. The proposal may well be familiar to you. It wasn't all that long that we looked at something rather similar. 28 Montrose Road for an additional dwelling in the backyard. Next one, please. The existing dwelling has 4 bedrooms. The proposal similarly is for 4, both to be 2 stories. The setback for the proposed is about 2.8 from the rear boundary, 2.5 from the side to the west, and 3.39 from the side to the east. The proposal is discretionary for the density standard, the setback and building envelope standard, site coverage and private open space standard, privacy standard, and the standard for car parking numbers. The site is at the north of Montrose Road. For the purposes of assessing the residential density standard, I highlighted what I consider to be the area, which we've got to have consideration for when looking at density, being those properties to the north of Phillip Avenue and to the north of Tilliard Street and bound by a main road. Go to the next one. And the property is in the general residential zone, and there's a bit of recreation zone over the tennis court in Montrose Road. Next one. So this is the location of the existing dwelling on the north side of Montrose Road, within the vicinity of other single detached dwellings. As I said, the proposal is somewhat or largely similar to a previous application, which I suppose I should state the PLN of that application was PLN 22452, and that was refused in November of 2022 on the grounds of residential density and the building envelope standard. And in subsequent to that refusal, the applicant, keen to progress, wanted to see what they could do in order to get to an approval. And so we've worked with them somewhat to get the proposal into a better standard. If we go to the next one, please. This is the area where the proposal is to be built. I think importantly with this image is the vegetation at the northern boundary, which separates that property from the other property at 39 Phillip Avenue, I think it was, which part of the building envelope protrusion goes toward. But with that vegetation, it would be largely invisible, and the dwelling at that property in Phillip Avenue is many metres away on the other side. So if we go to the next picture, this picture is taken over the fence looking at it from the adjoining property at 30 Montrose Road rather, and effectively shows what would be the private open space, and if you imagine 2.0 metres away would be the bulk of the dwelling, with a setback on the rear boundary, and I'll just get it again to be precise, 2.8 metres from that rear boundary fence there. You can imagine a dwelling being constructed. So as I said, the proposals rely on the performance criteria, and I've gone through some detail to assess that. I imagine you may have questions on it, so I'll touch briefly on them and then we can discuss perhaps afterwards, so I don't repeat myself. But with the residential density standard, I suppose we have an issue of density being multifaceted in that you have the numerical calculations as to how many units are in an area. Does this fit in with that sort of numerical assessment? And then also, what kind of a building is this dwelling and how does that fit within the area? And as you will have read in my report, how does that fit within the strategic direction for the area, in that we've got a general residential zone with built form standards and that sort of a thing. So in speaking to the residential density, yes, I've gone through to quite some detail about what prevails in the area and so forth, but the short of it is that where the proposal complies with the building envelope, in my mind, it therefore complies with the density standard, because that minor numerical deviation is immaterial to a large degree, because the structure of the dwelling is able to comply. Simply, if it was a dwelling addition, that built form would comply. And so I'm not of a mind to say that on a numerical basis that we can't have density above the rate of 1 per 325 when that development fits within the building envelope. So that leads to the next assessment. If we go to a couple of slides, that's the proposal plan. We go to the next one. So here we've got the building envelope, and you can see that for 3 of the 4 elevations, the protrusion, well, for 2 of the 4, it's less than 1 metre, and for 1 of them, which you can get from the western elevation, the eastern elevation, the protrusion's about 1 metre. Most of that is made up by eave, and it's only a small corner, and that's the corner which, I'll get this address right because it's important. It's not shown on the plans. It's the property to the north where that vegetation was. So that eave protrusion being to the south of a boundary where there is vegetation doesn't present, in my mind, an unreasonable visual impact because you can't see it from that property. And by being to the south, it can't quite possibly have an impact of overshadowing because the property is to the north. So in that respect, where the largest protrusion is, I'm satisfied it complies, and the other ones are fairly well minor protrusions, which you'd ordinarily allow for as being within the building envelope anyway, because they relate to eaves. So that's particularly on the northern elevation. You can see, I mean, the draftsperson's put the guttering on there as well. They don't often even do that. So it's very minor, and for that reason, I consider that it complies. Moving to the site coverage and private open space standard, the proposal has private open space between the dwelling and the frontage for the existing dwelling, which, where it's not orientated to north, invokes some consideration as to how appropriate it may be. And for the private open space for the proposed dwelling, it doesn't quite present a contiguous 24 metres squared with a minimum horizontal dimension of 4 metres. It's about 3.8 metres minimum horizontal dimension. With the first one, the proponent's gone to some effort to demonstrate that though the private open space is between the dwelling and its frontage, by having reasonably high fencing, which is still able to be considered as exempt, landscaping closer to the driveway, they do get a fair amount of sunlight for the required period of time. And for the private open space for the proposed dwelling, it's fairly well perfectly orientated, albeit with an 800 millimetre deficiency, so to speak. So I'm quite satisfied that it does comply with the standard in that sense. With the privacy, next one, please. Oh, that's here, that space. The privacy standards consideration because of this window, which is within 2.5 metres of a proposed to be shared driveway, though I'm quite satisfied that the height of the sill from the driveway, though it's not greater or not at 1 metre, which the performance criteria, the acceptable solutions states, the masonry construction is going to be sufficient for minimising vehicle noise. It's of a sufficient height that much of the vehicle light intrusion would be minimised. It's still a living room rather than a bedroom, so the disturbance of the occupants is arguably less. Again, I'd consider that the proposal does comply with this standard. So that's it for the development standards. Moving to the...
Can I ask a question on that while you're there?
Oh, yes.
Is that your right? So I don't
Yes,
forget
okay.
that is quite a deep slope, isn't it? That's quite a slope going down that driveway.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you the precise grade but they are proposing to correct it somewhat.
Right.
The development engineer may be able to answer that now for you if you wish.
Just while we're on that photo, it might help.
Yeah, sure. Bree, would you mind to talk to the grade of the driveway?
With the grades of driveway in my referrals, the plan shows that the long section complies with the maximum gradients of 20%, which is well within the requirements. The maximum driveway gradients is 25%, and now they have the steepest part is 20%, which sort of comply. In terms of the crossfloor, I appreciate that from the street view, it's going crossfloor towards the neighbor property a little bit, but if the concerns is about the runoff, they are proposing to level that up and provide the edge fitment, which is like some sort of curbing to be able to manage the drainage and direct it to the pit within the driveway.
I wasn't
So
concerned.
that this, yeah.
Sorry, I was more in line with the fact that I guess the slope of the driveway adds to your point that the cars will be almost underneath the level of the window because of the slope of the driveway.
Arguably, I hadn't considered the grade. I'd more considered just the relative height, but of course the grade's what's contributing to the height. Yes.
Yeah, so that's why I was looking at the driveway and I looked at the back of the house next door, how that's built up to a level and there's stuff underneath it. So, so it's quite a steep slope. So that works with what you're saying from my perspective about the height of the windowsill to the.
Yes, the acceptable solution says that windowsills can be 1.7 with a separation of 1 metre. And so this would be 1.7 at the furthest, perhaps only 1 at the corner. But because it's right on the edge of the driveway, it can't meet the acceptable solution. But even still, when you couple the height with the masonry construction, I would think that would do a rather good job of attenuating noise and light intrusion enough that it can comply with the performance criteria.
Yes, the plans for a car not to sit outside the front house's window and just sit there revving and carrying. So obviously that's not what you'd expect.
Thank you, Alderman King. Please continue.
Okay. So yes, that sort of concludes with the development standards for the zone, and then moving to the last discretionary item for consideration is the absence of a visitor car parking space. The proposal does include 2 car parking spaces per dwelling. The table for the acceptable solution does require 1 per 4 and then quite clearly says rounded up. So the requirement being for 0.5 of a visitor space rounded up equals 1 whole visitor space, which isn't provided for, but our engineer is quite satisfied that Montrose Road is able to have a visitor space accommodated on the street, which is often the case, and especially where visitors are more intermittent than if a person's relying on the street for their dwelling vehicle. Even if a person had a visitor space, it may be that visitors are going to park on the street out of ease. So I think most of our streets are capable of doing that. But if you have other questions relating to that, perhaps the engineer could speak to that. So having covered the zone and the code standards, the proposal was referred to our engineer, who has determined that it does indeed comply with respect to grades and that sort of a thing. Waste services were involved and they've indicated that it's able to be supported and that they'll allocate the appropriate number of bins. The proposal was advertised for the statutory 14-day period. We received 4 representations. The representations have a number of concerns relating to built form, the setback of the car parking, largely the sorts of matters that we've considered in the performance criteria, and then some other matters which aren't able to be considered, such as devaluation of property. Again, I expect some of the issues that the representatives have raised are likely to be issues that you've also want to have questions on. So I've itemised in the report a response to these specifically, and if you want me to elaborate further, I'll open that up to you. In conclusion, the proposal is assessed to comply with each of the standards for which discretionary consideration is sought, and subject to recommended conditions, especially those relating to the landscaping, a provision of parking in the construction period for the proposed dwelling, so that we don't have a lengthy period of multiple cars being out on the street, because there is a limit to how much we can have. The recommendation is to approve, and that concludes my presentation on it.
Thank you, Peter. Very comprehensive presentation. Thank you. Any questions for Peter? Alderman King.
Thank you, Peter. As always, very good presentation. Just with the screening at the back, you mentioned the vegetation.
Yes.
That's not a permanent fix. That could be removed at any stage, couldn't it? I mean, it's there now, but it doesn't mean it's going to always be there.
That's true. And that's an interesting point that we consider quite often, that if a proposal is approved subject to screening on a different property, if that person then removes that screening, then they're going to be looking at the dwelling. And so to what end is it reasonable to say that another person's property is the responsibility to reduce the visual impact? But of course, that's the context that we've got, and we don't have the site conditions aren't that there is no vegetation. The site conditions are that there are. If a person removes the vegetation after the thing is built, I suppose they'd nearly be doing that cognizant of the fact that when they remove the vegetation, they're going to be looking at a building. It's a very interesting point, though. I've grappled with it, and that's the way I view it, that it's related to the context of the area. If a person removes it after the thing is built, well, they've done so knowing what they're going to look at once it's removed.
I love the way you grapple with things. That means you think
every day.
Thank you. Any further questions, Alderman King?
No, pretty much.
Nancy?
Just regarding the density, I've had obviously a bit of a conversation with myself and with some others as well. It's just, yeah. Just regarding obviously it's 306 per dwelling, which is obviously under the 325, and the proposed property is going to be a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, where I think it mentions in the report that there's a lot more single dwelling in terms of height, not double story. So I'm grappling with the inconsistency of design for the area as well. So that's just a concern of mine. And obviously being below the density requirement, I appreciate that the applicant's obviously done a lot of work in terms of getting the envelope right and trying to get everything as best as possible, but we're still kind of flagging on a couple of things. So yeah, I guess that's a statement, but in terms of as a question, could you just, I guess, is there any way you can kind of expand or give me some comfort that that's going to keep it okay? If you know what I mean, like it just, yeah.
Yes, through you, Chair. As I've come to learn, talking in stories is not always helpful when looking at building form, and height is the sort of established measure of building form, and the way to determine what's appropriate in an area with respect to height is the building envelope. The building envelope may be complied with, be it single or double story. I do appreciate that it will not look the same as other dwellings in the area, but because it will be of a compliant form, I can't say that it's incompatible, because the consideration for the zone is that if you build within the envelope, you can't possibly be offending the residential nature of the area. If you're outside the envelope, then you may well be, but there can always be other conditions. But if we were to say, though you comply with the envelope, this is still incompatible because it's too big, because of the density standard, I would have trouble saying that assessment is in accordance with the objective of the standard, which is to, and I'll read it, make efficient use of the land for housing. And then the second one, more relevant for Homes Tasmania type developments, being optimising the use of infrastructure and community services. So it doesn't say in the objective of the standard to be consistent with the form of other dwellings in the street. The performance criteria lend to it a little bit, but when you're sort of erring, you use the objective to kind of put you in the right direction as to what the standard's trying to achieve. And I think that I've done a reasonable job of saying, well, if it meets the built form standards, it can't quite well be then considered to be out of step with the surrounding area with respect to its built form. There must be some intent that buildings will look like this, or we wouldn't have those sorts of development standards.
Yeah, and just with the density in terms of being under the 325, I would assume that we would see that come through over the desk a lot, that there might be some that are below that. Why in this case is it able to be a discretion that we go, okay, we'll kind of let that go?
We do see often that people are less than the 1 per 325, and that's when you do this kind of numerical assessment, qualitative assessment as to how it can fit in. It's almost self-fulfilling in many respects, because it's very difficult for people to actually get parking, dwellings, private open space and all of that sort of a thing on a 650 metre squared block. If they can do it, that's when you get the odd application that comes through where it is less than 1 per 325. And then you look at what they're building and you sort of say, well, if it meets all of the other standards, why would we prevent it for reason of not quite being within the right metres squared? I mean, another way to look at it, which isn't strictly within the planning scheme, but in general terms, would a person on the street know that this dwelling didn't quite cut it for 19 metres squared? If it was a 650 metre squared block, it would look exactly the same. Whereas if they were proposing 3, as I said, it's self-fulfilling, you'll just simply never get it. And so that density standard kind of does a silent regulation in many respects.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Any questions, Alderman Cockshott?
I'm all good, thank you. And my concern was in regards to car parking, but you've answered that question earlier, so that's fine.
Thank you. I just have one question about the condition 4. I think there's just a word missing perhaps from the end of that from the end of the sentence. Until completion,
yeah,
is it? Is it meant to say until completion?
Yes, complete, I would think, is the word.
The commencement of work for the preparation and construction of the proposed dwelling, and the area for the temporary parking of vehicles used by the occupants of the existing dwelling must be provided and must be maintained during construction until completion.
I would think that you could delete the word until.
Delete the word until. Put a full
Must be maintained during construction.
I think that's.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure, okay. Yes, apologies for that.
No, that's okay. Just correct that. Okay, I don't believe we have the applicant here, nor any of the representatives. But if there is, speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, so we have a recommendation that a permit be granted for the multiple dwellings residential of 28 Montrose Road, Montrose, subject to 13 conditions as outlined in our agenda report here, noting that a correction to condition 4. Yep. Do I have someone to move this as a motion? Moved, Alderman Cockshott. Someone to second? Alderman Yaxley, Alderman Cockshott.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Nothing further to the discussion. Good to see another dwelling being made in the municipality.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Alderman King?
Thank you, Mayor. I think Peter's given a really in-depth look at what's going on here in presentation.
Although it's pushing the boundary, maybe I think it fits, and it's about what's going to happen more and more in our environment. More and more houses are going to be built in backyards, I think. So well done, good job.
Thank you. Alderman Yaxley?
Just a comment again. I think well done on the presentation and the explanations. Really appreciate that to give some comfort and some understanding. So that's fantastic. And it gives me some understanding in terms of the envelope and making sure that things fit around it, and that, you know, not necessarily all the numbers, you know, the numbers might not necessarily say everything, but to look at the whole thing as a whole. So yeah, not happy.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think it's been really useful consideration for us, and you know, we are a council that is open for business, and this is a great example of us demonstrating how we can work with applicants who, you know, we've seen this particular proposal in a slightly different form was refused last year. So I think it's commendable to both the applicant and our you, Peter, and our team at council to work with applicants to try and make things fit and work in everybody's interests ultimately. I'm satisfied that the report demonstrates that those performance criteria are met. I do note we did receive 4 representations, so I want the representatives, you know, to be on the record that we have received and read those representations and certainly have considered those representations, and I'm satisfied with the explanation Peter's given in the report in response to those representations. So I'm happy to support the motion and seeing the development occur. Alderman Cockshut, would you like to close debate?
All good, thank you.
Okay, I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. That's carried unanimously. And Trevor, once again, would you like to explain the process from here?
Sure. The application has now been decided by the planning authority, and the decision has been to approve the application. The application will be notified of the decision and then has 14 days to appeal the decision. The 4 representatives will also be notified of the decision, and they also have 14 days to appeal the decision. If after that 14-day period, no appeal has been submitted, the permit will take effect and the proponent can act on that permit.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7, proposed use and development, multiple dwellings 76 and visitor accommodation unit, including works at 43 Russell Road, Claremont. Trevor, are you presenting? Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you. I'll just mention at the opening that this assessment was undertaken by Grace Paisley, and that Grace is offline doing some other work for us at the moment in relation to new software. And therefore I'll present this report on her behalf today. So I acknowledge the work that she's actually done on this report. What we have here is a proposal for 76 multiple dwellings, which comprises 52 3-bedroom units and 24 2-bedroom units. And this is developed in 8 stages over the area shown on the screen as being the subject site. Now, that's the site on the screen of the actual multiple dwellings that would be constructed. There are actually 2 other parts that are shown on that screen that are relevant to this application as well. If you look immediately south of the area in the red border, you'll see an existing dwelling. That's the existing dwelling on the property, and that will be converted as part of this application into visitor accommodation. The reason that will be happening is because the way the scheme is written, that part of the block is actually within the landscape conservation zone, and there are restrictions on subdivision. There are also restrictions on multiple dwellings in that zone. So if that house was considered to be the 77th dwelling, we would have a prohibited development here. So it's to work around the scheme that we're actually having that as visitor accommodation. I believe the applicant is quite happy to do it that way because it does provide a way forward to get an approval for the 76 multiple dwellings on this property. As I mentioned, the development occurs in 8 stages. It includes also internal driveways and visitor parking. As I mentioned, the use of the existing house for visitor accommodation. There will also be, as part of this development, some widening of Russell Road to facilitate access into the unit site. And immediately to the north of the site that you can see on the screen, you'll see a quite thin blue line, which is a rivulet. There's also water, I believe sewer infrastructure within that property, which is a council reserve. So the application does also include that land immediately to the north, but only for the purposes of extending infrastructure into that reserve to connect to the existing sewer mains and to discharge stormwater to the rivulet. The zoning of the property is general residential, as is the adjoining land to the east and to the west. As I've already mentioned, the land to the south is included in the landscape conservation zone, which is the light brown sort of colour there, mustardy colour, and the area to the north in the dark green is the environmental management zone, which is the council reserve. The proposal, as I mentioned, is to construct 76 dwellings on the site. This is the site plan. It's a little difficult to read on the screen, but I can assure you that when it's actually shown at its correct size, it's actually much easier to read. What we can see there is there are a number of rows of units detached. There are some attached towards the south of the site, but predominantly detached, running east-west across the site. We can see there are 5 internal driveways that run east-west across the site and a main driveway along the eastern side. The units are located up the hill because the land actually slopes from the top to the bottom, and they take advantage of the hill and the views to have views out towards the Derwent River. This is one of the drawings that forms part of the approved drawings, should this be approved, which gives a bit of an indication of the fact that the dwellings that form part of this development are actually terraced down the slope. The larger spaces you see between the dwellings there is actually at the locations of the driveways that service those dwellings. Probably the best way to get a feel for what this development would look like is this photo montage that has actually been provided with the application. This doesn't form part of the approved plans, but does provide a good illustration of the nature of this development, particularly that it comprises a large number of detached dwellings and a small number of attached dwellings, and that these are located in a sympathetic way in terms of the topography of that land. So that's a good indication of what it would look like when built. The proponent has also provided a number of drawings of what the development would look like. These again don't form part of the plans that we would be approving here today, but do provide a good indication of what the quality, the form and the nature of the development would be. That roadway we see in the foreground there, that's actually an internal road. It would not be a council asset. It would be managed as part of the development. And what we can see there is a number of detached single dwellings that are taking advantage of the slope to provide a second story at the lower level and more room at the upper levels. Here again is an indication of what the development would look like. Again, we see on the left-hand side the dwellings on the upper part of the slope and the dwellings on the lower part of the slope on the right-hand side. And what we can see there as well is one of the 2-way driveways that services the proposed units within this development. The development had a number of discretions, and I'll go through them fairly quickly here. The first discretion related to site coverage and private open space. Although it wasn't site coverage, it was actually the private open space that created the discretion. The discretion is that for several of the dwellings, not all of the private open space is provided in one location, which is a requirement of the acceptable solution. A number of the dwellings have the private open space provided in a combination of the balcony and the courtyard. This has been assessed by the planning officer and has been determined to satisfy the performance criteria despite not being in a single location. The second discretion relates to privacy, and it arises from the fact that some balconies and car parking spaces overlook other dwellings or the private open space of those dwellings. This has, however, been addressed through screening, the design of the units and the separation of the units. And for these reasons, it's considered that the performance criteria has been satisfied with respect to privacy. The third discretion is a discretionary use under the landscape conservation zone, which is 23.3.3. In this instance, the discretionary use is actually the visitor accommodation. In this case, it's considered the performance criteria is satisfied because what we're dealing with here is an existing building. So it's not as if there was further development within the landscape conservation zone. And the building is considered to be compatible with the landscape values. We're not actually dealing with any new buildings here with the visitor accommodation, but merely a change of use of an existing dwelling to visitor accommodation. So that gives us some comfort that that provision is actually satisfied quite clearly. The next discretionary use, which is 23.3.1, is the infrastructure that's located within the council reserve, which is in the environmental management zone. Now, what you're looking at there is to determine whether there are adverse impacts on the natural values in that land. And a natural values assessment has been provided, and that report concludes that there would only be a minor impact of that infrastructure on the values of that land. It's also worth bearing in mind that the disturbance would occur at the time the infrastructure is installed, as both obviously the sewer and the stormwater infrastructure will be underground infrastructure, so it won't be apparent once it's installed. What else have we got there? Next discretion relates to vegetation management, and this again is the impact on the vegetation in the reserve from the infrastructure. And as with the previous discretion, the natural values assessment has highlighted that there would be minimal impacts on the vegetation in that reserve during the provision of that infrastructure. Traffic generation was also a discretion, and the assessment of the development engineer can provide more information on that, but the conclusion is that the external roads, in particular Russell Road and Abbotsfield Road, which services development, have sufficient capacity to accommodate the additional traffic generated by this development without any adverse impacts on the functioning or the safety of those roads. The second last discretion, and I should mention the two of them together. Building works within a waterway protection area and within a waterway. They're two separate performance criteria within the Natural Assets Code, and they relate to, again, the provision of that underground infrastructure within the council reserve. And as I've already mentioned, the natural values assessment provides us with sufficient comfort to conclude that that would only have a minor impact on that qualities of that land. During the advertising of the application, we received 2 representations and they raised a number of issues. Some of them are relevant to the assessment of the application and some of them. The first matter that was raised related to the increase in traffic on Russell Road and Abbotsfield Road. And as I've already mentioned, the development engineer reviewed the traffic impact assessment that was provided with this application and was able to agree with the conclusion of that assessment that there would not be an adverse impact on the safety or efficiency of the road network as a consequence of this development. The next issue that was raised related to the state of existing footpaths in the area. Now, this was a comment generally about the state of footpaths, does not relate to this proposal, and so therefore it's not a matter that we can take into account in the assessment of this application. The next matter that was raised was again a general comment about the need for additional children's play equipment in the area. Again, this is something that the application or the approval of this application can't address, so it's not a matter we can take into account when assessing the application. The third issue that was raised was the management of the vegetation along the rivulet. And again, it was a matter that could not be considered in the assessment of the application. The manner in which the vegetation within that council reserve is managed is not something that's within the ability of the developer to have any control over. The final ground that was raised related to the density of the proposed development. However, it's noted in the assessment report that the density actually satisfied the acceptable solution and achieves a density that's actually satisfies the requirement of 1 unit per 325 square metres of land area. So that concludes the presentation on the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Trevor. Any questions from planning authority? Alderman
Yes,
Yaxley?
thank you, Mayor. Just through you, just would like to get some understanding, just perhaps just expanding on about the natural asset code, just in terms of where it applies to, and I think we mentioned that there would be some minor in terms of the vegetation in that area, some minor. Is the hope then that that will then grow back over time? Is that if it's underground infrastructure, or?
Look, the Natural Assets Code applies to this application primarily because there's actually a rivulet that runs through that reserve. So wherever there's a rivulet, there's a setback area, and that invokes the Natural Assets Code and says, well, you need to have a look at the impacts on the vegetation.
Yeah.
I note in the report that there's no riparian or rivulet side vegetation that would be impacted by this. But obviously, when you're installing some underground infrastructure, you need to have some minor level of disturbance to the ground cover and also potentially to a number of small trees.
Yeah.
In relation to whether you want it to grow back, from a natural asset perspective, it will be good to see some vegetation grow back in that area there. But really, from a case of protection of the assets, you probably would prefer that you didn't have trees, for example, being planted over the stormwater mains or the sewer infrastructure in case you had to go back at some time and dig that up. So what we're talking about is a reasonably large area of reserve there and a fairly narrow strip of land that would be disturbed by this infrastructure. So I think the effects would be quite minimal.
Okay. And just regarding the stormwater management, noted that there's some further report needs to come back from the applicant. Could you just explain the process for that?
Yeah, certainly. Through the chair, the issue with that one there is it's not that we didn't receive stormwater reports or plans of the proposed stormwater management. We've received quite a bit of information on that, but we hadn't got to a point where we were satisfied that all the issues had been addressed. So those reports that were provided did allow our development engineer to have a fairly good understanding of how stormwater would be managed. But I believe there's a number of matters that still need to be resolved, and that's why we weren't able to issue the general manager consent in this instance. The issues that I understand related to some design of the on-site detention. We have an understanding of what's proposed, but we don't have details of that design. And I believe there may be some further work required in relation to overland flow paths, just so that we can be absolutely sure that in a major storm event, you wouldn't have overland stormwater impacting any of the units.
Yeah.
So they're matters that ideally we would have liked to have addressed them as part of the assessment of this application. But in this instance, the applicant requested that we proceed with the planning permit and that would be dealt with at a later stage. We'd hope that's dealt with fairly soon. We have conditions on there that certainly ensure that it will be developed, will be assessed to the full extent required necessary before the development can proceed.
Okay. Yeah, that was my next question was just to make sure that if we approve today, that if there was an unforeseen thing that could not be overcome, that would then wipe this decision out. Is that effectively how?
Yeah. What would happen? Through the chair, what happens in that instance is we put a note on here, an advice note, but what it means is where an applicant chooses not to provide us with all of the information to issue a general manager consent, it means we haven't considered stormwater in an integrated way when we've assessed the application. And that therefore poses a risk, but that risk sits with the applicant. The risk is that when those stormwater matters are resolved, that they may need to go back and change the design that has been approved or may be approved today. That may be a very minor change, and they may be able to make that change through a request to amend the approval. But if it was a quite significant change, it may mean they can't actually act on this permit. It will need to apply again for a new permit.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of where the risk actually sits at the moment, whether it's at that lower end, and it may be something that's easy to resolve. But we don't want to preempt the outcome of that full assessment, which is why we put conditions on there requiring certain things to be done. And particularly one of the conditions is that you cannot get building approval until this matter of stormwater has been resolved.
Yeah.
The first stage of this application is actually to commence the use of the visitor accommodation, but to even commence or to get building approval for the first stage for that first limited number of units, we would have to see this stormwater matter resolved to the engineer's satisfaction.
So it's, when you talk about risk, we're not talking about risk that the stormwater system will be inadequate, because that, you know, that it will need to be demonstrated prior to building or plumbing permits being granted.
Through the chair, there's no risk that that would be the
Yeah.
outcome.
Yeah.
The risk is with the applicant of the need to potentially get further.
Yes. Could cost some money, and time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Further questions?
Quick, oh, sorry,
No, I'm fine. Thank
You
you.
done?
just a quick one on the landscape conservation zone.
Just to understand this completely, the dwelling that's already there is in the landscape conservation zone, is that right?
That is correct. Yes, it is.
But the others aren't in that zone?
No, through the chair, no. The totality of this development, with the exception of the visitor accommodation, is within the general residential zone.
Right. So why do we have to change that the visitor's house from whatever it is? If it's not in the same area as the residential,
It's through the chair. It comes back to the way the scheme is drafted, I guess, is probably the easy answer. But the short answer, but the answer really is that, you know, the way you would want to actually proceed with this development would have been maybe for that to be a 77th unit or something like that.
so you can't who rezones that area?
That would have been zoned when the planning scheme, the current planning scheme, came into effect.
But if we wanted to change that, can we do it? Is that state government? Is that us? Can we?
It's something that could be initiated by council,
Right.
but whether that was warranted or not,
That's right. That's okay.
whether we could justify that, I'm not sure.
I get it. That's fine.
Yeah, but the visitor accommodation, the reason it's been done that way has resulted from discussions between council officers and the applicant as the best way forward to achieve the 76 units on the general residential land.
I get it. That's right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe we have any of the representatives here. But we do have the applicant and representatives of the applicant. If you would like to address the authority, you're welcome to, but if not, no pressure.
I just thank you for the consideration.
Happy to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have a recommendation before us that a permit be granted for the multiple dwellings, 76 and visitor accommodation unit, including works of 43 Russell Road, Claremont, subject to 22 conditions as outlined in our report. I have someone to move this as a motion. Moved Alderman Yaxley, seconded Alderman Cockshott. Alderman Yaxley.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. It's good to see positive development happening. Obviously, we know the housing situation we have in our in Tasmania, down here in Hobart as well. So it's great to see some positive developments happening. It certainly looks like a challenging site in terms of the scope and the ability to do that. But the applicants obviously put a lot of hard work and understanding to make sure that it fits in with the surroundings and all the discretions. Certainly, obviously, need to consider the stormwater side of things to make sure that all gets ticked off. But otherwise, happy to approve the recommendations.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Alderman King?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I always get nervous at the development this size, particularly with the other developments around that. Having grown up in that area where it was all bush, but development's good in this sense, like what you actually said. I appreciate that. I appreciate the in-depth discussion we've had and the explanations around everything. It is what it is. I think well done to all and sundry. So
Thank you, Alderman King. Alderman Cockshott, any further discussion?
Just echo my fellow alderman's thoughts. It's good to see, and particularly with the amount of dwellings in the area, particularly with the housing crisis. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it progress.
Thank you. I appreciate the effort put into this report to us. Again, it is a very comprehensive report. It's been a significant process, I imagine, for both the applicant and council officers to assess such a significant development. Too, like my fellow elected members, welcome development in our municipality. That does demonstrate it complies with the planning scheme, and certainly that's what we've heard from the presentation this afternoon. We've seen from the report that we've received that the discretions we have to consider in relation to this application, certainly that the performance criteria have been met in relation to those discretions. So I look forward to seeing this development progress. Sounds like we are supportive of it around the table here, providing for 76 new dwellings, roofs over people's heads. They are 2 and 3 bedroom developments. So they will house certainly a significant number of people and families. So I look forward to seeing the development progress should we approve it when we put the motion to the vote. Anything to close debate, Alderman Yaxley?
No.
I'll put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand if you are for. That's carried unanimously. And for a final time, Trevor, would you like to explain the process from here?
Yes, thank you. The application has now been decided by the planning authority, and the decision of the planning authority has been to approve the application. The applicant will be notified of the decision and will then have 14 days to appeal the decision. The representatives will also be notified of the decision and will also have 14 days to appeal the decision. If no appeal is lodged within 14 days by either the applicant or the respondent or the representatives, the permit will take effect.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming along this afternoon. Final item on our agenda is item 8, update of Glenorchy Planning Authority terms of reference. I don't think this requires any presentation, Paul, unless you are keen. No. So we have a recommendation that council adopt the updated terms of reference attached to the report. Do I have someone to move that? Moved Alderman King, seconded. Oh, it was nearly a tie. Seconded Alderman Cockshott. Any discussion, Alderman King?
No, as you said, I think we've, thanks, Mayor, thank you.
Okay. Any discussion?
Really straightforward, makes sense.
Thank you. Happy for me to put the motion?
Happy to beat my younger generation, yes.
I'll put the motion. Please raise your hand if you are for. That's carried unanimously. That brings our planning authority meeting to a close at 4:49 p.m. Thank you to members of the public who have joined us this afternoon. Thank you. See you later. Thank you to planning officers for your efforts for this afternoon's meeting. Thank you to my fellow elected members. We will close the meeting.
Sold.
Well, that's good.